Okay, so the last section in chapter 2, which is about properties of matter, discusses chemical properties and chemical changes and then how we compare those to physical properties and physical changes. So this is shorter than the last section. This is a pretty short section overall. There's basically um, two major vocabs in here, as well as three major ways to recognize chemical change. And then besides that, you're just comparing that to physical change. So a chemical property is a property that can only be observed when the substances are changing into different substances. Okay. So unlike a physical property that you can observe or measure as long as the substance remains the same, in this case, it has to go through some sort of chemical equation or chemical reaction to observe this property. So the two major ones that we look at are flammability, which is the ability to burn in the presence of oxygen by definition. This is a chemical property because where there's fire uh, and where there's burning, there are elements or compounds changing into new elements or compounds. Therefore, a chemical change is taking place. So flammability, the ability to burn in the presence of oxygen, is considered a chemical property. The other major chemical property that we talk about in this section would be reactivity, which by definition is how readily a substance combines chemically with other substances. So how easily or how readily something combines with something else is referred to as reactivity. So for instance, nitrogen and oxygen are both gases. Nitrogen has an extremely low reactivity. It doesn't react with a lot of things, whereas oxygen you don't really find in nature by itself. It's usually a compound or combined with something else because oxygen forms or reacts very readily with other substances. It kind of shows you that here. You could see this car, there's rust forming on it. This is from a chemical reaction where oxygen reacts with iron and water, and it changes the composition of this car over time. That car is no longer made of the same substance, so a chemical change is taking place when a car rusts. So that brings us to this part of the chapter, which is how do you recognize a chemical change? Okay. Well, one major indicator you saw on here was a change in color. Okay. Does that always mean 100% without a doubt that a change in color means that there was a chemical change? No, it does not. But a lot of the times, if there's a change in color, it's a very good indicator that a chemical change has taken place. So the car rusting and changing to that reddish brown color, or in this case, if you look at these bananas here, and they're turning from green to yellow to black and brown, that's showing that a chemical change is taking place. These things are not made of the same chemical structure anymore. They are changing. You're observing chemical properties while they're changing, so chemical changes are taking place. Another one is jewelry tarnishing or changing different colors over time. The more it's exposed to oxygen, the longer you have it. Okay? The second indicator of a chemical change would be the production of a gas. So you know a chemical reaction is occurring, or a chemical reaction is taking place, or a chemical change is taking place if you see a gas produce, or if you see any sort of bubbling or sort of fizzing, you know that a chemical reaction is taking place. Those bubbles are usually showing a gas like carbon dioxide being produced. So something at the molecular level is changing into something else. A chemical change is taking place. The last one would be the formation of a precipitate. Those of you that don't know what precipitate is, it's a solid that forms and separates from a liquid mixture. So, for example, when you make cottage cheese by adding acid to milk, and that cottage cheese forms from the milk, which was liquid, and now you have a solid in the form of a precipitate, that would be an example. Okay. So again, a precipitate is when a solid separates from a liquid mixture. So basically you see a solid, or in this case, it's showing you the liquid milk and it's showing you the small curds coming out of the milk. This also shows that a chemical change has occurred because at the molecular level, one thing has changed to another. You could even try this at home if you really wanted to. You could add lemon juice or you could add vinegar to milk and you would see small bits of solid separate from that liquid. You would see a chemical change occur. Okay. So to recap, the three ways that you recognize chemical changes: changing color, the production of a gas, or the formation of a precipitate. Okay, and that's really it for this chapter, and not just for this section, for this chapter. So as long as you know the difference between a chemical and a physical change, physical and chemical properties, and some of the ways that we classify matter that we talked about in 2.1, that's all this chapter is. So we'll be working on this and continuing moving forward.